Okay, we make a start. So our next spotlight presentation is on the topic of biodiesel's contribution to decarbonising transport. Our presenter is Julianne O'Reilly. Julianne is the Business Unit Manager of the Biofuels Division at the College Group. And the College Group is Ireland's leading bio-waste management company. They work closely with the food service sector, and they're continually improving and expanding total waste management solutions. I'd like to thank Julianne for your contribution to the Erbia Transport Group, and I welcome you to give your presentation. So could I have your attention, please, for Julianne O'Reilly? So maybe just give it a minute or two.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Sean. I'll just give it another minute or two before I start. Let everybody get settled back in. Lovely. So the title of my presentation today is Biodiesel's Contribution to Decarbonising Transport. So just to give you a little bit of background on our company, we were founded in 1989 and we're the largest processor and exporter of animal byproducts in Ireland. So we have two rendering facilities. By tradition, we're renderers. We have College Proteins in Nobber, County Meath, that is a Category 1 rendering facility. And then we have College Fara in Fara, County Cavan, and it's a Category 3 rendering facility. So our Category 1 facility produces two outputs, an oil and a meat and bone meal, and both of those go into the renewable energy sector. Our Category 3 facility produces oils and meals that go into the pet food and aqua food industries. We have expanded significantly in the last number of years, and we've had a number of recent developments. And all of these developments actually play very well into the theme of today's conference, which is promoting sustainable bioenergy for business. And they relate specifically to our business and how we are promoting sustainable bioenergy. So we have a number of projects. We have a willow farm, which is approximately 40 hectares. 1 hectare of willow equates to about 13 tonne of biomass. I'm sure there are other people here who have better specifics on that than me. My area specifically is biodiesel, so when we get to that, I'll give you a bit more in-depth detail. But roughly, the energy content is about the equivalent of 4,500 litres of home heating oil. My own unit of the company is College Biofuels, and we have the capacity at present to produce 25 million litres of biodiesel per annum. We also have a company in Newry which is called Soilworks, and they are an organic fertiliser company, and when they're up and running at full capacity at the end of this year, they'll have the capacity of 30,000 metric tonnes of natural fertiliser for use in the agricultural and retail markets. And then our most recent project that has actually come into operation in about June of this year, so an ideal time of year, was a solar farm. And we installed a 3 megawatt solar farm over 15 acres. And that produces enough energy to power our entire Nobber site during, obviously, daylight hours and when the sun is shining. But it makes a big contribution to reducing our carbon emissions as a company. So our upcoming project at the moment that we've recently gotten planning permission for is College Biogas. And that's going to be co-localised at our site again in Nobber. So we'll have our biodiesel, our biogas, our solar farm, and our Category 1 rendering facility all on a single site. And that biogas facility will produce 49 million kilowatt hours of energy per annum. So across all the sites at the moment, the company has about 140 full-time employees. So just to give you a little bit of background on biodiesel production, I'll keep it as simple and as light as possible. There may be some of you who understand this and some who don't. Just briefly, biodiesel is produced from an oil which is composed of triglycerides and fatty acids, free fatty acids. This oil can either be of vegetable or animal origin. It can be virgin oil, so unused fresh oil like rapeseed oil, or it can be a waste-based raw material such as used cooking oil or tallow. To convert this oil into biodiesel, you require the presence of an alcohol and a catalyst. So the majority of biodiesel production is done in compliance with European Commission Regulation 142/2011, because the majority of biodiesel, certainly in Ireland, all of the biodiesel is made from animal byproducts. And for that reason, there are human and animal health safety concerns that have to be complied with. So there's two steps in biodiesel production. There's an esterification step and there's a trans-esterification step. So this relates to the composition of the oil, so the triglycerides and the free fatty acids. And you can just see here on the right-hand side the inputs into the process. So at the top you have just a schematic there of a free fatty acid. The next schematic is a triglyceride. So a triglyceride is just composed of 3 free fatty acids and a glycerol molecule. And then you have either your acid or alkali catalyst and your alcohol. So the two steps required to convert all of the oil into biodiesel are the esterification and the trans-esterification. Your esterification converts your FFAs into fatty acid methyl ester molecules. It requires methanol and an acid catalyst, and the compliance regulations require this to happen at a temperature of higher than 72 degrees, a very acidic pH of less than 1 for more than 2 hours. Trans-esterification then relates to your triglycerides and converting them into a FAME molecule and a glycerol molecule, and it requires methanol and an alkaline catalyst. And that alkaline catalyst trans-esterifies the triglycerides, but it also neutralizes the acid that was added in the first step. This process must occur at a temperature between 35 and 50 degrees Celsius, a pH of greater than 13, and it must happen twice for 15 minutes. So these are the parameters of the reaction that happen to be compliant with European legislation to allow animal byproducts to be used in biodiesel production. In Ireland, there are, as I said, nearly all biodiesel produced is in compliance with this regulation, and that's due to the fact that it's all produced from cashew tallow and UCO predominantly. Other feedstocks that can be used in Ireland are palm oil, mill effluent and acid oils. So your outputs then from your biodiesel process are biodiesel itself, BHO, which is bioheating oil, glycerol, which I mentioned there a moment ago, and fertilizer. The fertilizer is produced from the interaction between the acid and the alkali catalysts. So it's just very important to consider all of these outputs and what can be done with them and where they can go in terms of renewable energy and in terms of considering sustainable bioenergy for business. And I'll show you how we've kind of built that into our business strategy and how we're capitalising on utilising all of our outputs from our biodiesel facility. The characteristics of the biodiesel that you will produce are entirely dependent on the feedstock used. So if you use UCO, you will get biodiesel with a particular set of parameters. If you use tallow, you will get biodiesel with a different set of parameters. So these are important considerations depending on the market into which you want to sell your finished product and the climate in those environments. Okay, so just briefly to mention the biodiesel quality and sustainability. Our biodiesel in College Biofuels is produced in compliance with EN 14214. So what that requires is it requires an ester content of greater than 99%. It has a CFPP, which is a cold fuel plug point, so the temperature at which the product would congeal of around about plus 10 to plus 12 degrees Celsius. This is particularly feedstock dependent. If your biodiesel is produced from UCO, you will have a value at that point of maybe 5 or 6 degrees Celsius. Sulfur obviously is very important environmentally, so to be compliant, you need to be less than 10 parts per million sulphur. Our biodiesel is in the region of less than 5 parts per million. Additionally, monoglycerides have to be less than 0.01%, moisture has to be less than 300, and it has to be stable. It has to be suitable for storage and long-term use, blended with fossil fuels. So it needs to have an oxidation stability of greater than 8 hours. And these are just samples taken directly from some of our storage tanks. So the feedstock into the plant is a black product. The biodiesel out of the plant is a refined, distilled product that is clear and transparent. So just obviously, along with quality being a very important factor for our biodiesel, sustainability is very important, and it's a key factor in all of our discussions today. So just some sustainability considerations that we take into account when we are planning our biodiesel facility and our purchasing and our sales and all of our procurement. These come directly from the Renewable Fuels for Transport Policy Statement for 2021, and the sustainability considerations listed there are the impact of a process or product on biodiversity, the possibility of indirect land use change, the possibility of pollution, the cascading use of bioenergy resources, and the potential for preventing fraud specifically in feedstocks relating to the transport sector. So I'm sure people have heard about the issues that were experienced with UCO in the past, and whether it was genuinely a waste and a used product or a virgin oil, as I mentioned earlier. So we take all of these items into heavy consideration in relation to our own product. And when I think of sustainability and I think of our product, what I think about is producing it with minimal impact on the environment or society as a whole over a long time period. Everybody has a different definition of sustainability, and it's important that we understand what each other thinks in terms of sustainability, and that's what I think of when I think of our biodiesel. So how do I do this? How do I approach minimal impact? Well, the way that we approach minimal impact as a company is that we want to look at minimal resource usage. And to do that, we produce our biodiesel from waste feedstocks. We also continuously optimize our process. So we're continuously looking at how we can improve our process, how we can make our plant more efficient. Minimal energy usage is the next one. So that's maintaining an efficient plant. That's continuously innovating. All these things that will contribute to reducing your cost, your risk, and your carbon output. Minimal GHG emissions. So again, I mentioned all of the different branches of our company, and what we do as a company is we use green energy to power the facility where possible, and we also look at sustainable procurement and where all of our inputs are coming from. Again, mentioned in the Renewable Fuels for Transport statement was the cascading use of bioenergy resources and minimal waste. And what that comes back to is looking at your byproducts, your wastes and your residues, the outputs of your process that are maybe not your primary focus, but they need to be considered, and how you're going to deal with these and how you're going to use them. What we do is we focus on turning them into raw materials for other renewable energy projects. And then finally, of course, on the last slide, fraud was mentioned, and that's where your traceability of your feedstocks comes into play, and your certifiable supply chains. So in Ireland, all biofuels are stringently vetted. So they're vetted by voluntary certification schemes, which are independent international control systems that certify sustainability. So what that does is that it assures us that Irish biofuels are derived from highly sustainable, high availability feedstocks. And I know, obviously, my area is biodiesel, that's what I'm primarily interested in, but that goes for bioethanol as well. So it's both crop and waste-based feedstocks. And these criteria, these sustainability criteria, are hardwired into the system. And what that does is it brings peace of mind to your finished product, that it can be distributed and certified as sustainable. So just a quick look at our plant. So our project was completed in March 2020. Our commissioning was delayed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Full production was realised in the first half of 2021, and our capacity was increased this year in the first half of 2022. So our current capacity is 47,000 metric tonnes of feedstock processing per annum, and that's following that expansion phase. But our current production is in the region of about 700 tonnes a week, so we have plenty of room for growth and plenty of room to increase our outputs and increase our contribution to decarbonising transport within Ireland. The feedstocks that we process in Nobber are Category 1 tallow, UCO, same as the other biodiesel companies in Ireland, and then we also have the capacity to process acid oils and palm oil mill effluent. And the reason for this is because we are able to run a process that operates at a higher temperature and a higher pressure. We're the only company in Ireland that can convert feedstocks with FFAs up to 70%. The traditional process converts feedstocks up to maybe 25 or 30% FFA. And it's because we use this simultaneous acid catalyzed esterification and transesterification. So the two parts of the conversion process that I described to you earlier, we can achieve both of those parts with an acid catalyst because we apply a higher temperature and a higher pressure. We do also do alkaline transesterification. It's essential. It's part of the requirement. But we have a much lower reliance on it, and we use that alkaline also to neutralize our acid. So just to give you a snapshot of the impact of biodiesel in 2021 in decarbonising transport. So this is ultimately the most important slide in the entire presentation. But when you boil it down to a few numbers, it's very easy to capture it all on a single slide. But it is a very significant impact. So in 2021, 246 million litres of biofuels replaced about 215 million litres of fossil fuels. And what this did was that 623,000 tonnes of carbon equivalent transport emissions were avoided. And that's a huge number. It's a very substantial impact. There's a long, long way to go, but it is the equivalent of taking about 250,000 cars off the road. So it's not to be made little of. It's to be identified and built on. What needs to be done is the things that we are doing well, such as these increases annually in biofuel contribution to the decarbonisation of transport. It needs to be focused on, it needs to be nurtured, and it needs to be increased on an annual basis. So just to look at the contributions by energy of the different biofuel products, biodiesel within Ireland was responsible for 87% of the decarbonisation of the transport sector. So bioethanol was responsible for 11%, bio-LPG 1%, bio-CNG less than 1%. So it's pretty apparent that biodiesel is still the main contribution to the decarbonisation of transport within Ireland. Electric vehicles play a small role, but it is very much down in the 1% region. There's room for all of these biofuels, and they all need to be encouraged and expanded, but it's important to remember what's making the biggest contribution at the moment and to focus on that and to encourage it. So the biofuels obligation of some important positive messages are that the biofuels obligation of 12.63% for 2021 was met. It was met on a volume basis by an approximately 6% inclusion, and that's because all of these biofuels get a double counted energy inclusion, and that's due to the fact that they're all produced from wastes. And then also importantly, 93% of the biofuel placed on the Irish market in 2021 was made from waste and residue. And again, that comes back to your sustainability and looking at how do you minimise your impact. So if you want to minimise your impact, take a waste, convert it into a biofuel, and use it to decarbonise transport. So just to go into, I suppose, what I see as the three main challenges that exist for us currently in terms of decarbonising the transport sector. and in terms of biofuels and bioliquids. So the first challenge is feedstock availability. It's not just a domestic issue, it's an international issue too. But domestically in particular, it's important to note that 53% of the feedstocks used to produce renewable fuels for transport in Ireland came from outside the EU, and mostly from Southeast Asia. And those are the figures for 2021. Only 18% of the feedstocks for biodiesel used in Ireland were sourced in Ireland. Now, that is an improvement of 7% from 2020. It probably is to do with our company coming on board because we're a newer company, so we would have expanded that. And as a result, we stopped exporting our own category 1 tallow. And instead of exporting it to the UK or exporting it further afield, we've just brought it across the yard to the biodiesel plant and converted it into biodiesel. So that's one of the challenges that exists. The second challenge is the cap on the inclusion of biodiesel produced from UCO and category 1 tallow. So that cap is set at 1.7%, which equates to 3.4% if you do your double count. But currently, here in Ireland, we're at about 4.5% inclusion, and that cap is not suitable for the Irish transport sector and the breakdown of our national fleet. We are heavily reliant still on biodiesel or on diesel-fueled vehicles, as well as hybrid vehicles and petrol vehicles. So to have a cap at 1.7% is not appropriate for Ireland, and it is something that needs to be addressed. And then our third challenge is advanced biofuels, which is another area that is coming on board, and it's yet to be mandated for 2023 in Ireland. So just to, I suppose, turn these challenges into opportunities, what are the opportunities that exist out of them to aid us in decarbonising the transport sector? Well, one of the biggest domestic resources that is not being tapped into or capitalised on is the second type of tallow that I spoke about earlier, so that second type of oil. And it is a different classification. It's called a category 3 tallow. So it's an Irish end-of-life product from the agri-food industry. It's not currently being used because it can be used in another industry. So it can go into the pet food or the aqua-food industry. But that's not what's currently happening. Why would it be an advantage for us to use it in our own renewable energy sector in Ireland? It would be an advantage because it would increase our security of supply. That's one of the themes of today, the risks associated with energy in Ireland and the opportunities for reducing those risks. So it would increase our domestic supply of raw materials for biofuels for the transport sector. It would increase the capacity of the biodiesel production in Ireland. As I explained, we have plenty more capacity, but if you can't get feedstocks, you can't make the biofuel. And it would also be verifiable and traceable. It's a domestic feedstock, so it would be very easy to keep track of it. So at the moment, there's about 35,000 tonne of category 1 tallow available within Ireland for biofuel production. But there's currently about 90,000 tonne of category 3 tallow. So that's 90 million litres of biodiesel that we could be making in Ireland if it was treated in a similar manner to the category 1 tallow and to the through the way that HVO is currently treated. What happens to that category 3 tallow at the minute? At the minute, our own company exports a large quantity of it for the production of HVO. And the sad thing about that is that the GHG emission savings from HVO as a product, which is hydrotreated vegetable oil, or from TME, which is tallow methyl ester or straightforward biodiesel, are comparable. So that's these figures up here on the right-hand side. So these are taken from RED 2, which is the Renewable Energy Directive 2. And they list the default values and the typical values of GHG emission savings versus fossil diesel. So HVO has a typical saving of 83% versus fossil diesel, or a default value of 77. And biodiesel, or TME, tallow methyl ester, has a typical saving of 84%, or 78% versus fossil diesel. So there's no valid reason why that category 3 tallow couldn't go into biodiesel production within Ireland versus exportation to, amongst other countries, Finland, and then being imported back into the country. So at the moment when that HVO is imported back into Ireland after being produced in another country, it gets a multiplier, or it's proposed to receive a multiplier of 1.5% on its energy content for the decarbonisation of the transport sector. So what our industry sector is working on, it's lobbying towards indigenous feedstocks for biodiesel. So expanding our feedstock supply by using additional indigenous feedstocks such as the category 3 tallow, but by applying a multiplier that's comparable to HVO or greater to incentivise using Irish waste for Irish renewable fuel. It seems like a very sensible request, and that's one of the key opportunities that we see. Just in relation to the other two challenges, so our industry is also lobbying for the derogation of the 1.7% biofuels cap on the UCO tallow. We believe that's essential. The reason we believe it is essential is because the current national fleet is around about 64% diesel, 32% petrol, 0.5% electric and 2% hybrid. That's a rough overview of the breakdown of the current national fleet. It's important to note that diesel cars, petrol hybrid cars, they haven't gone. They're still present, they're still growing, they're still on sale, and people are still buying them and driving them. And I think this item is clearly reflected in the 87% contribution of biodiesel to the decarbonisation of the Irish renewable fuel in the transport sector, and it really does need to be addressed and to be focused on at an EU level. Advanced biofuels, they are due to be mandated in 2023. I think you'll get an update on those at the next panel discussion. What it does require some kind of legislation or ministerial order to be implemented. So there's a target of 0.3% in 2023, which would be a requirement of about 9,500 tonnes of advanced biofuels. With double counting, that indicates a requirement of about 4,500 tonnes. But what that does, again, is it brings additional feedstocks on board, additional opportunity, additional output capacity from the companies that exist domestically to meet that need. But it needs to be progressed to allow that expansion of feedstock inclusion. No problem. Okay, so just to finish, further decarbonisation of transport. So the overall biofuels obligation by volume has increased from 16 to 19 to 23%, or is increasing over the next 3 years. And that will potentially lead to an obligation of about 38% by 2030. But the question is, why wait to increase this biofuel inclusion? So E10, there is progress on this at the moment. It is scheduled at the Irish Four Courts for 2023, but it is subject to supporting legislation. So again, this would reduce carbon emissions by 93,500 tonnes a year, which is another 45,000 cars equivalent off the road. So it's essential that that is progressed quickly. And then with the biodiesel, why wait? Why wait till 2025 to increase the contribution to 23%? If this B12 inclusion was increased as quickly as possible, it would increase the reduction in carbon emissions, so it would further decarbonise the transport sector by 930,000 tonnes of carbon emissions a year, equivalent to removing 460,000 cars per year. So again, these are things that should be done quickly. Why are we waiting? Why are we not progressing this further decarbonisation of transport? Just to finish off, the very last slide that I just wanted to mention is, I said at the beginning of the presentation that we were doing a number of things as a company to move in the direction of having a sustainable bioenergy for our business and to reduce our costs, our energy costs, to reduce our carbon emissions and to give ourselves more security of supply. So just to give you an overview, what we currently have is we currently have the rendering and biodiesel plants. We have built the solar farm. The solar farm feeds in nice green energy to our rendering and biodiesel plants. We also have a CHP generator which can burn gas to generate electricity. And to feed that CHP generator, we have our anaerobic digestion plant, which is currently in progress. So what we do as a company is we capture all energy sources, be those created by byproducts and waste, or be them in the form of small improvements and investments such as heat recovery. We review our operations frequently. We reduce any energy loss that we can identify within our plants by maintenance, by exploring alternatives, and we continuously innovate and we continuously invest. And all of those things are needed to move towards sustainable bioenergy for business. And again, they were mentioned by in the last panel discussion in relation to Enterprise Ireland. We engage with Enterprise Ireland a lot. We secure funding from them. We use that to innovate. We invest back in the company, and it makes a big difference in reducing your risk and improving your sustainable bioenergy. Thanks, Sean. I better leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Julianne. And certainly College Group is a leading light in terms of Indigenous biodiesel production. Likewise is Green Biofuels Ireland based in Ross, which are also an Erbia member.